Thank you, Victoria.
Okay, so good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's virtual design review panel. I'm Victoria Cox, host of this meeting, but panel member Vince Caliza will be the chair. Just a couple of quick notes. In addition to our panel members, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and the media observing this meeting. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DRP webpage. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking. Thanks, Vince. You can please begin the meeting.
Thank you. Any changes to the agenda today?
No.
Okay. Any declarations of interest? I see Mario.
Yes, that would be me. Vince, I will not be participating today.
Thank you. Okay, so the only item today is a mixed-use development located at 71 Rebecca Street. The lead planner in the file is Andrea Deer. Good afternoon, Andrea. Andrea, we're ready for your presentation.
Oh, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I think I was unmuting myself at the same time as Victoria was. Good afternoon, panel. My name is Andrea Deer, and I'm the planner on this file. We're here to discuss 71 Rebecca Street. The applicant is proposing to develop the lands with a 30-story, which is 97 meters excluding the mechanical penthouse, mixed-use development with 730 square meters of commercial on the ground floor and 430 in residential uses above. The commercial space will be oriented towards Rebecca Street, flanking both John Street North and Catherine Street North. As you see, the site is located here. This is an old picture from Google, and you'll know that the park has already been constructed to the south. In this site visit photo, you'll see I'm looking at the existing building at 71 Rebecca, and you'll see parts of the park. We took this picture to illustrate what would be directly across the street because it is an important park. I just wanted to draw attention to that. This is a view of 71 Rebecca Street from the south side of Rebecca Street, looking northwest. Oh, and again, looking northeast. There were three options of floor plan. I'm just showing the one to save time. And you'll see that Rebecca Street is proposed to be a Woonurf Street and should be complementary to the park. This is a rendering of the proposed development looking towards the northeast. The proposed massing image that was submitted by the applicant showing the massing from the John Rebecca Park. The building orientation, you'll see there is a podium, two podiums, and then the tower portion above. Here they're showing some outdoor amenity space, parking to be located in the building, and then the residential you'll see above. The Schedule E Hamilton official plan designates this downtown urban. Schedule E1 has designates these lands further to a downtown mixed-use area. The Downtown Hamilton secondary plan also designates the lands downtown mixed-use, pardon me, and it is a high-rise 2. It's also identified as being within a higher order transit station area and registered but non-designated cultural heritage. You'll see here on John Street North and Catherine Street that we have view corridors to the Niagara Escarpment that will need to be protected, and building heights up to 190.2 meters are permitted. So a few of the policy terms, I apologize, it's a little policy. If I'm speaking too quickly, just let me know. The Urban Growth Center permits a range of commercial and residential uses. And pedestrian focused, multimodal, meaning the street should be designed for cars, pedestrians, transits, bikes, all of the above. And this is where the focus of growth in the city is being directed. The downtown mixed use permits a range of commercial and residential uses as well. There's a pedestrian focused animated streets with upgraded streetscapes. And again, streets should be designed to support all forms of transportation, including active transportation. The downtown mixed use designation The secondary plan, the following policy shall apply to the development fronting onto, and this is very specific for this development, fronting onto John Street, King William Street, Catherine Street, and Rebecca Street across from the community park. So buildings shall address and help frame the street and open space with active and accessible uses at grade. The orientation of the building, including windows, entrances, balconies, and other building elements, shall be oriented towards the park where possible. And buildings, buildings shall incorporate appropriate step backs to provide a human scale podium as well as mitigate potential shadow and wind impacts on the park. As I mentioned before, the views and vistas are to be protected. And John Rebecca Park is identified as parks and open space, so all policies regarding that will apply. And it is a registered non-designated cultural heritage resource. The urban design policies within the Urban Hamilton Official Plan say that the tall building guidelines apply for all buildings greater than 14 meters. It's important to achieve transition to adjacent existing and planned low-rise and mid-rise buildings, and that can be achieved by separation distance, step backs, and setbacks. Shadow and wind effects are to be minimized on sidewalks, streets, parks, and other privately owned, publicly accessible spaces. Buildings should be located close to the street lines, have active facades, and direct pedestrian access. Buildings should also be appropriately massed to be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, contribute to a high-quality space and the public realm. Appropriate transition in scale to adjacent and existing planned parks is required, and the design must allow for 50% sun coverage at all times of the day on existing and planned parks and open spaces. The tall building guidelines apply. And section 2.7 speaks directly to this area, and it says that the height of new buildings should be low to mid-rise. Taller buildings may be permitted if the height is massed to achieve a harmonious relationship with adjoining buildings, public spaces, and planned development. And the facade of larger buildings will be designed with an articulation of an 8 to 20 meter wide rhythm. Section 3.3 Parks and open spaces says tall buildings should be oriented and massed to minimize shadow at all times of the day. No new shadows may be cast between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. on major parks, and tall buildings should be sited and designed to protect views and vistas. Section 3.4 speaks to vibrant streets and encourages building entrances to be emphasized as a focal point to animate the street, and buildings should be designed to allow streets to have at least 5 hours of sunlight on September 21st. As mentioned before, the Niagara Escarpment is the view and vista that's to be protected. The zoning bylaw, the lands are zoned D1, which is downtown, mixed use. Exception 701 has some site-specific allowances for this site with regard to setbacks and parking, and the holding provisions are easily removed when certain criteria are met. H17 is for sun shadow, overlook privacy, and H105 requires a record of site condition. The D1 zone provides for a mixture of personal service, restaurant, retail, and residential uses in standalone or mixed-use buildings. And I just wanted to point out that this is, I'm sorry about that. This is a pre-application DRP, as we do not have an active site plan. Questions for the panel are, is the proposal compatible with adjacent land uses, including matters such as shadowing, overlook noise, lighting, traffic, and other nuisance effects? Does the proposal contribute to the character and ambiance of the community through appropriate design of streetscapes and amenity areas? And my favorite one, I always seem to use it, does the proposal create comfortable pedestrian environments by locating principal facades and primary building entrances parallel to and as close to the street as possible? Does it include ample glazing on ground floors to create visibility to and from the public sidewalk? Is it including a quality landscape edge along frontages where buildings are set back from the street? And are they using design techniques such as building step backs to maximize sunlight to pedestrian areas? That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. We're now ready for the applicant to make your presentation, and try and limit it to 10 minutes, please.
Yeah, Victoria, do you want me to upload it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll just do that now. Okay. Should be sharing our screen. Okay, if everyone can see it, I'll start. My name is David Butterworth. I'm the design partner for Kirkor. I will run through the first few slides because while they're good for the background overall of how we frame DRP, which everyone should have, we know it's in the downtown core, downtown Hamilton, within the central policy. Obviously, one of the things about it is the central location gives us that 5-10 minute walk score to various other places of interest and around there. It's also located very close to the two main streets through downtown King Street, but we're also really joined right next to John Street, which is again a good north-south route through the downtown. And there's that 5-minute walk, which actually is a very important sort of characteristic within where we start to see the amendment and changes that are coming to many of the downtown buildings. So this provides you really with the background of the zoning, where we are. I'm just going to skip through these slides because what it will really show you is we're sitting within the high-rise designation, high-rise 2, within the context of where we should be within the downtown Hamilton secondary plan. So that sort of focuses us then on to where the two main streets are and, the connection between Rebecca, Catherine, and John Street. And again, it was correct in how the building should frame those two streets. And again, talk about that connection to the park, which is sitting right opposite. I thought I'd show some of the context images. These are just with background because it does show the historic context of Hamilton. And really, it was a major contribution to Ontario as it started off. And these are the images we start to see now, whether they're a tourist image or where we are. It's Hamilton's undergoing a great growth period, and it's welcoming to see. So this is the site. It's obviously in an area that is being undervalued, underused. It does have the park opposite to it, which is going to be a great contributing factor to it. And, we think this is going to be, part of the next phase of where Hamilton is going to occur. It's going to start grabbing east on the overall context. So if we look at this image, this is the John Rebecca Park directly south of us. Obviously, we've got parking, which fills a lot of the downtown core, parking area spaces, which are to the north and to the west. Hamilton Police Service Building is going to be to the east. And so therefore, we've got to recognize what really is going on and how we need to develop the building. And so, we like to engage precedent images, what we think and how this should work. So obviously the top image is how this sort of pedestrian-friendly, really energized building should sort of start to perform. And what we looked at is the other images about retail. Now, we've actually had a few ideas about how that should work, and not necessarily holding on to one primary thought, because if you look at, say, this middle image here, restaurants being able to spill out into the street, or even canopies being able to do that. We really want to engage. This building is going to be the closest to the park and really needs to engage that element of how the street works. And so the spill or the flow down from the facade out towards the park is going to be essential. And if you look at that park can change in so many ways and how it uses and how it's going to be formed, that I think it's going to be a very interesting sort of dialogue juxtaposition between the building and itself. And so what we looked at was publicly accessible space, making sure we have ground floor, provides open sitting area spaces within it, restaurants that open directly onto the Rebecca Woonath. We looked at the ability to be able to make outdoor amenity space that connects down, flows down through the building from private amenity spaces so that it sort of feels like it's greened the entire building as we move down through it. The engagement at the street edge with the landscape design how the green edge and the landscape buildings will contribute to the building, the Woonuf, which really becomes the buffer between the park and the building. And then the steps. So we're introducing the step backs from the building so that, you know, what we have is that flow. The building is stepped back from each portion, and the building responds to how it looks from the individual sort of areas. Now, one of the things around it, we're obviously going to have to build above grade parking. There's not a lot of choice here that was previously in the zone of the previous application, and also the soil conditions are really not good. But we need to contribute the design of this so that it actually does not look like a purpose-built garage with a building on top, but it has a flow into the building. And the main entrance, that really needs to be articulated very well, even though we want to have high-level retail and amenity uses on the ground floor that really indicate how that sort of is going to prosper into the street. So I know Mario produced this. I'm not sure whether he can talk, but this is one of the concepts that we're driving forward with that helps to engage into the Woonuf and the pedestrian elements just off Catherine and John there. So it engages into Rebecca. There's also a secondary sort of idea of how we would do this as well, how the unit pavers would stretch across directly into the other side. So really it contributes into one street that flows into the building from one side to the other, and then you get into Rebecca Park to the south. And again, some further idea about striping and articulation of that material movement, which demonstrated in the elements below. So what we really wanted to do was get into the idea of what, and I'll just move to this slide, what we should be doing. This is, you know, before we put a site plan in, I think it's really important to be able to get dialogue and feedback. Do we want to build CRU space into the entire ground floor? Obviously, it's limited. There's indoor amenity at the back. We actually believe probably that is not what you want to do, even though CRU may be the option you want to do. We want an active frontage. We probably believe getting a better shaped CRU, which is this option 3, with an indoor amenity that if you program it right, will reach out into the public realm and frame both Catherine Street and Rebecca, and at the same time the CRU will frame John Street and Rebecca itself. We believe this is probably the best approach to do, rather than put all CRU everywhere, which really might limit the success of what we're trying to do in that street. As you can see, what we've done is separated the pedestrian off on the front, and all the traffic on the back is circulated through here. So we have really a primary vehicle drop off at the back of the building, and a vestibule at the front, which really is the pedestrian realm, which we're trying to focus on. Above grade parking, getting into typical units within the building. We've gone for certainly a matrix within here that will be successful to the building itself. And then what we started to do, I'll move really into this. You can see how our thoughts are about Rebecca Street, how it contributes to the building. I'll just get through to the sketches because that's probably one of the things about where we're trying to get to the building. The podium is large because of the framework of the above grade parking. So what we're trying to do is break that idea down so the building breaks down in its overall look and feel. So that what you do is maybe contribute to the two side elements of the building. It starts to reduce its mass, and it's bringing that idea of an active sort of facade into the residential sitting in the podium, and the idea of that being contributing into where the parking deck is. So what you end up with, these are examples, precedent examples that you know, we think would contribute to where the building would look overall in Hamilton. Certainly sort of engage back into some of the history of Hamilton and the architecture that's there. And the feel of the building itself then will be developed so we break the monotony of the tower coming down, punctuate the facade. So that's not the best look. We're probably, you know, and the colors are changing. This was a quick, really idea. What we're looking for is feedback from the panel about how the tower can be clean and simple, and let the base of the building itself really contribute in terms of warmth and color and variety. We haven't included all the landscape, so this is just an architectural expression. And that really is the focus of trying to get into where we are with the building overall. And we thought this is the start of where we think it's going to be really good. And if you look at the shadows, you'll notice the shadows really from early morning moving across don't contribute onto the park at all. So it's a north shadow. So I think in that respect, we don't create any issues in terms of how shadow impacts onto any of the public streets. So that's our presentation. I was pretty short. I hope everyone's read the previous issues, and we'll answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a very nice presentation. I like the way you structured it. So now we're going to go to some questions from the panel. I don't know if Yuta has joined us yet.
I don't
yeah,
think...
I did.
Oh, she did. Okay.
I did. Sorry, I had to use a different laptop. So I'm Mario for this meeting. I thank you for the presentation. I just had a quick question in regards of your retail strategy or your initial thoughts.
Yeah.
You have two options, and I was wondering if you could walk us a little bit more through the kind of retail options you have been looking at, or if you have been approaching different retailers or different ideas.
Yeah, the client really hasn't yet got into talking to specific retailers. The issue that we found and what we were talking about when we got into this was, let me just close that window a little bit. If you look at the screen on this, the depth of retail here, because we want to be able to provide indoor amenity throughout the building, it creates this a building that's got active amenity throughout the entire building. But what it does is it creates the CRU is not very deep. And that's a fear that you're only going to get a limited type of retailer involved in it. Retailer to the right, to the east, and this may be better. So if we expanded that and said, again, maybe the indoor retail can change. Again, the best retail is maybe this location and this location. What we wanted to do was create success. So what we said is, if we put the indoor amenity or a portion of it, it'll be a typical, we'll have to look at what the actual programming is, but this would create the best success for the CRU. And then what we'd do is define what goes in front of the CRU in the indoor amenity in terms of landscaping and streetscape that would then be appropriate to the two different uses.
Okay, thank you. That's all my only question.
Great. Thanks, Yuta. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. I guess before I go to questions, I just have to point out that the package we received did not have the concepts that you've just shown us, David, at the end. So that we're seeing those for the first time, which it's a little bit of an issue. So I don't know, there's not really a lot of time here, but I think we're going to need a little bit of time to at least look at those a bit longer than the flip through we just had. The concept we saw was called the white box facade one.
Yeah, Tim, we looked at that, and honestly, let's just say we weren't comfortable with it. The client actually, I'll speak up for them. They weren't quite comfortable that was the right approach. Part of it was trying to integrate the parking into the building itself, so it all feel a little bit harmonious. And what we felt was, as we were researching through different other projects, the sketches that we've done, those sketches, the ones that really started this off, they were really reflecting where we were trying to head. So if you look at these sketches, I think they're still reminiscent of where we were trying to go currently now. And what we're looking at is how the facade on the south may be different than the facade on the west. So it may not be completely wrapped around, because what we realize is the box of the building could end up being or feeling quite large. And that's a concern that we had. These examples here really what they start to do is they break down the facade, even though the modules of the framework, as you can see, could be broken across into the podium. The color changes are very clever. And what we felt is if we were going to mimic something, it's always, you know, as good architects, we look at precedents and materials to help guide us. We felt that this was probably a better approach than where we were going. I mean, I really liked this building itself and the way that the facade was done, and the tower actually stands out as a completely separate element. But the one thing that we have to be very careful with, that's a very long facade. So trying that approach may not work on it. That's why I say what we were looking for is to say, we like the cleanness of the tower where that may go, and then the facade element may, it may represent something either similar to this, break it down, or as we're moving forward, you can see how it starts to, the life of the building really has got to be generated down at the street level. And what we were thinking of, because Hamilton historically has that.
Sorry, David, I'm going to interrupt you in the interest of time, because I was just trying to make a point, is that we've only seen we've had about 10 seconds looking at this concept. So it just means, I think, and I'll let other panel members speak, is that we won't be able to provide too much comment on this concept because we simply haven't had time to look at it and discuss it. If you leave it up here long enough, I suppose we can generate some comments for you. But it goes to, I guess, the question to you and maybe to Andrea and staff is you know, what exactly are we commenting on here? Our thought is that we do need to provide you with some comments on just design principles to guide your further work. But I'm just letting you know that. So that my other question was to Andrea. I think it's to Andrea, which is we gathered that the site was rezoned a couple of years ago based on the previous concept, and I just wondered and this is just a site plan application coming in as of right, we assume in terms of massing, but I just wanted to confirm that what was approved was the height limit, but there was no density provisions included or setbacks that we need to be aware of, that this is fully conforming with whatever zoning was approved.
Oh, hi, this is Andrea. I am not 100% certain that it is fully conforming. No, maybe the applicant would be able to answer that.
Yeah, Andrea, I can chime in on that, Andrea. We've done a review on this, and in all of our reviews thus far, this is completely compliant with zoning. I will note that on our project info sheet, it did note that there was not 85% lot area coverage requirement. In fact, site-specific provision 701 permits up to 100%, and this is currently sitting at 95%. But in all of our reviews thus far, based on the preliminary concepts that we viewed here, we are 100% compliant with the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
I have no other questions.
Thank you, Tim. Jackie?
I think we lost Jackie. She had a power outage. So until she comes back, we'll just skip over her.
Okay, Yasin? Is Yasin here?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah, I like to just reiterate Tim's point. It is a little bit difficult to review everything when this is the first time we're seeing it. But I suspect some of the comments might be similar. Can I just ask, in regards to the landscape piece, the John Rebecca Park, there is a constructed park already. What you're showing is quite different. Maybe formally the shapes are the same, but in terms of materiality, it's quite different. And are you proposing interventions in the park?
No,
because there certainly isn't that many trees there, for instance. But you've detailed the landscaping quite a bit, and so I'm just trying to understand. I'm not talking about the street trees there. I'm talking about the park itself. Like the way you're showing the park is quite different than what's there when I look at the Google current shots of what's constructed.
Yeah, there isn't the same amount of trees that are there. This could be taken from an earlier.
The trees, the materiality, the disposition of like everything's different. So it's just this. There are circles on site which are a little bit similar, but even the pavilion that's drawn here is seems to be of a different scale and plan than what's there on site. But I can't be for sure because the photographs are in an awkward perspective on Google. Okay, so that's not part of your site. It's just the roadway, right? This is a whimsical impression. Like I'm just wondering what the reference for this is. Like, is it yourselves who've done this, or
no?
What is the source of this?
If I can chime in, that yes, and that would have been the original concept for the park.
Okay. Thank you.
What's shown on the landscape plans is the implemented version, although you only see a very small snippet of it.
Okay, thank you. And then just a broader question regarding the context. Are you aware, or did you do any kind of exploratory work on the rest of the block? Because obviously your building has a huge impact on the rest of the block and the rest of the surroundings, considering that nothing else is in that area. Did you consider what kind of impact the tower would have to future development there? Because obviously there'll be setbacks, and you might be guiding future design decisions around that block, right? By the height and disposition of your tower. So did you do any exploratory work like that?
No, because part of it, honestly, Vizra, is that, sorry, this is a site plan, so it's already zoned. We do understand that there may be an application in coming to the north or the west. I think France is trying to get as much information about those as possible. Obviously, because this is zoned, the other buildings are going to have to come back and see what we're doing. And if we're trying to keep in compliance and conformity with the zoning, so we're not offside from that. So I think there's been preliminary discussions with one developer, but we're waiting to get some updated information from them directly.
Yeah, and just to build on top of what Dave has just stated, there was a very specific design that came through the previous official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, and some setbacks that were applicable that we are meeting, and we're carrying forward that spirit. There are some changes to the design, but the intent of this particular design was to maintain the requirements established through that previous zoning bylaw amendment.
Right. The last question is, I guess the spirit, and I put that in quotation marks, the spirit of your precedent images are very urban, like meaning that it takes on in a lot of context, a lot of urban design, which you actually have no control over. And so I'm just wondering how, looking at the diagrams you set up, can you just speak to one or two of the key sort of urban design principles that are at the top most of your mind when you're working on this? Because it impacts on the way I'm reading into the diagrams you've presented, and they imply a lot of relationship to streets and massing and height and the continuity of the park and so on. And yet I don't see that necessarily in the architecture, and that will be a later discussion. But maybe if you could just talk about the top two or top three urban design principles that you're trying to follow.
Yeah, one of the things about creating architecture if you want to call it to a certain extent, Yazinian, you're quite correct. But we're working in a vacuum, and therefore you've got to be a proponent of what you believe is right and going to be a lasting impression, and also potentially an influence around other buildings. Not that I believe every building should look the same. I don't. What I'm trying to do is create a quality influence on how buildings should be designed and affected, especially if they all go down through a position where they may do above-ground parking or whatever. So our biggest position was having an active, open ground floor that would then reach out into the Woonarth or the park or the street. Having a base podium here that then would be able to then not show itself as a primarily a parking deck, and then as that moves, it would transition into the residential element of the above grade podium itself. The tower, again, is the idea, is the influence that the tower could be seen as a separate element. But if we were doing that and the podium really had the strength in it, we were going to have to break that podium down. And that was the key between, and as we develop it more now, the colors and material really have to have a strength in it as we move forward within the podium design. And then developing entranceways and the visual clues that we need from the street into the public realm spaces.
Right. Can I just add last question? Sorry, is on the architecture. I'm assuming we're going to look at this whole package anyway, as is. There's a distinct. You mentioned the client's interests being shifted and potentially them saying that this may not be an appropriate strategy, but the whole sort of depth of the external envelope and the curtain, the system that you're showing in the previous package is dramatically different than what you're showing us today.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering from a design side and the understanding of materiality and some of these urban responses that you're talking about, what is guiding that shift? Because I can see that from a cost standpoint, it's quite different as well. Yet I see some massing relationship, but there are some distinct changes, and there was obviously a shift, a design shift, not just a client request. I'm just trying to understand what is the driver of the change between one deck and the other deck that we're looking at, other than a personal preference of things. Yeah.
Well, partly it was, the idea of trying to bring the original was bring the tower down more down into the podium. And what we felt was that probably wasn't the biggest driving move within the overall design, that we actually needed to make the podium stronger rather than the tower. That's a switching philosophy.
Okay.
And also, if we look at the contributing factor then of color and material, we felt that moving into this direction, it was going to contribute to the overall atmosphere and surrounding context in a better way than having a color that maybe end up being too monotone
Right.
to the overall sort of landscape. And that's dangerous. You have to be very careful with it. It could be a great design element, and maybe it works well now, but what we would need to do is bring something in that contributed in a timeless fashion. And that's where we were starting to go with this.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasin. Colin?
I have no questions.
Thank you. James, are you with us? James is not here?
James is here. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, there you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's a great looking project, and it's great to see some activity happening to the north and east of the downtown. Removal of all that surface parking and replacement with new active buildings. A couple of quick questions. Are you adhering to the zoning requirement for the minimum first story height of, I believe it's 3.6 to 4.5 meters?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just explain? I'm struggling to understand what is the facade, what is the base of the building. Can you just understand maybe the design transition from the at-grade condition to the lower, sort of, I guess, podium component of the building, where you've got your parking to the left-hand side and residential towards the east?
Yeah, so if I look at this again, we're still playing with this, how this works. But essentially, if you look at this image here, and maybe the best image is on the bottom left, just to give you an idea. The at grade is all retail or amenity. And again, we haven't formulated 100% how that needs to be developed and where the property positions need to be. Again, option 3 is our preference. The 4 floors above it are parking. So this is why we've got, we could do an open deck and just, clear parking decking, but the choice was not to do that, but actually was to enclose it and get the feel of, so that it sits and it's got the same value, the same grid system as you would sitting above it. So that is a reflection of the building. So what we need to do, what's missing from some of this now, is canopies that come out to the street. Maybe there's some undulation within the facade, especially if we work the retail in on the west side. So there's a defining line really from the ground floor up to the second that is all public realm. Would I like to push the developer? And here's the thing, if I was doing this now and had been part of the zoning, I would have pushed this to be 6 meters height in retail or amenity space, because I think it needs a little bit more push higher to create a little bit more of a presence rather than even the parking above it. So the problem is what we're working with is previous approval and now trying to develop it so it makes it a stronger project.
What part of the previous approval confines you to such a low first story component? I mean, the issue that I'm struggling with when I look at that at grade condition, whether it's a proportion of the building base or proportionally so much smaller, if you look at it proportionally in the context of the totality of the building height, it really seems to be lost and it's an afterthought, whereas it really should be trying to blend into the base. What part of the prior approvals is preventing you from giving that base level, that grade street component of the building a stronger connection with the base?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. What we have is we have setbacks primarily to the second all the way through up to where the 5th floor is, where the ground floor is, the setbacks to the street from that, and the above grade parking. I mean, if you were doing this, would I have organized it slightly different, that the approval process might have said, I want to have, although it's a very tight site, could you try and get some residential sitting there fronting into this portion of the above grade rather than have it all as parking? And would I have lifted this up another 1.5 meters to gain some more height so that it would actually stand out by itself and not feel, a little bit dominated maybe by even the 4 stories above it?
Mm.
It's an exercise we're going to have to work through to promote and influence the ground floor and the retail a lot more as we develop the project. And in part, we put these images up and some of the design sketches to a certain extent create enable feedback. We could have waited till we'd got to a finalized product coming to see you and then said, hey, here we are, isn't this great? I actually enjoyed this process, but sometimes it's the welcoming feedback that you get that says, here's what we think is going to be the struggle on a building.
Yeah. I'll try to frame this one as a question as well. I mean, the zoning bylaw requires that everyone's in love with podiums, and zoning regulations are now structured to bring buildings close to the street edge and maximize the facade widths across properties. And I think here it's a 75% requirement that lot line to lot line you shall occupy with building space. So potentially you have 25% of this total street frontage that you could recess in some fashion. It's not required, I don't believe, to meet that maximum setback requirement. Did you consider any openings in any way to try and create some private amenity space that could connect with the public amenity space along the sidewalks?
That's if we take option 3, James, I think that's partly where we're going to end up going, and our recommendation would be to, within the plan, start looking at pulling some of that, the facade back at the ground floor level to create more engagement. If we maintain where we're at, I'm just trying to get to the plan, that option 3. I think what we need to do is try and create more influence so that instead of building right up to the lot line, because I can carry the building above it in the plans. What I'd like to do maybe on the corner where we do have more of this open space on the west and the east, maybe develop a little bit more so you have a little bit more recess that then creates public-private sort of pop space that is more influential than just creating and maximizing CRU or amenity space. So
I appreciate those comments, and I don't have any further questions because I think that the direction that you're going with that is something I'll come back to in my comments. So yeah. Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, James. Tim, if you could take the chair. I'm curious to know what's influencing your discussions on CRU, because all of us are experiencing issues with it now, given the current state of affairs in the retail world because of COVID. But is your client reluctant, or is his marketing studies indicating that you should limit the CRU? Because I guess where this question is coming from is you got a spectacular opportunity on second and third, possibly, because that wall just beckons, vertical real estate. So the thinking is that, you showed images how the building, other buildings relate to the street and how the second and third floor has that energy that it would drive towards the street. And, particular outside seating spaces or whatever on the upper floors. And granted, I fully appreciate your density and why you're trying to max out the parking. But my question is, I guess I'm looking to see what's driving why you did not look at a method to use some retail or restaurant space above the ground floor as a means to open up the building to the street. Because right now you basically enclose your 4-story parking level above the ground floor retail. And as I say, granted, there may be some reluctance to add retail. Or is it simply do you have constraints that you're dealing with?
Well, no, Vincent, what you're really doing is, regardless of what's going on the ground floor, what you really want to do is get into an efficient parking garage as soon as you get above it. Could you take the left-hand side, bypass all this parking, the spaces over on this side, and suggest to the client, well, you should put some retail in there on that side. So what you should do is double up your retail here on this side and maximize it and get some double height space or mezzanine space or whatever. We're extremely tight in terms of where parking is to fit it in within the zoning. But what you need to do with CRU, we know we're successful on projects where the depth of that retail really wants to be sort of 40 feet deep. If you get less than that, you're getting into a situation where you don't get internal storage, you don't get equivalent sort of window space to be able to showcase what's going on. And what we wanted to do was really look at, and again, they've got to do their own market study. Is there a reluctance now? I don't know, because the building will take 2 years, 3 years to get built out. So where we are in 3 years' time is, you're in no man's land. But what we do want to do, and this is the key from the developers, they want to contribute to an existing and vibrant, because it is really turning into a vibrant downtown Hamilton, retail, and is it a gritty retail that maybe it's, a mixture between that sort of artsy coffee shop, because this is what the trend is on the east side of Hamilton. It's got a very different flavor than central to west. So I think they're going to be looking and developing this more as we get more information.
Yeah, it's funny how you call it the east side. I guess I guess where I'm getting at is, you've got 497 units or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you didn't have that kind of density, you'd be able to free up some parking to, then would give you an opportunity to deal with some space on the second, third floor to articulate the building in a stronger way.
You're probably right, Vincent, but I hate to say it, when someone buys a site from another developer, it's all contingent on being able to get the same number of units they bought. So if they free it up, they're just giving away, money then in that regard. So we're authorized
well,
to go.
You are and you aren't, because you're creating retail space or restaurant space on a second or third floor that overlooks a park. That just, like I say, it beckons itself to this is a grand opportunity here to energize that space. And the revenue stream from the retail would offset the loss of units in the tower. So anyway, I'll leave that there because it's getting into a comment rather than a question. But on the Rebecca Street facade, are you stepping back the portion of the tower above the I didn't. You went through it pretty quickly. If you've got something that shows the footprint of the, okay, so you're stepping back.
So we're stepping back. If you look at the 3D, maybe it's easier to see. Maybe those diagrams are a little bit quicker to see. Yeah, we step back. This complies with the overall massing there. So if you really see what we're doing here, we're going up the 4 stories, then stepping back, and then moving up. So the whole building is really the ground floor, which sits inside. The previous architect actually pushed the ground floor in a lot more. There was a lot more major overhang than we're actually showing. So if you look at this diagram, there where that 2 meters is, it sits back and then runs down through the building where the parking deck is. And so you can see the ground floor sits on the inside. So that's again where you're looking at it, you're trying to see how much more engagement we can create there, which James also sort of pushed us at. You can see.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the Rebecca end where it steps back. I don't know, you've got your podium at 5 and then you go up another 4 or 5 floors.
Yep.
It steps back again northbound, but does it step in from the east side towards the west for the tower? Or does the tower facade come straight down over the section of 5 stories above the garage?
Yeah, let me just get to that diagram. So yeah, that's again, this is complying with our previous zoning. We're sitting there. There's the step back 3.2 meters from the edge of the building. So this is where it runs around. That's the step back. That's the step back here. So that's the 5 story. Then this portion of the tower would run down to that portion. Yeah, on the
right down to the top of the parking deck.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's all my questions for now. Thank you. So now we'll close the question and answer session, and we'll move to panel recommendations. So we can start with Ute.
Thank you, Vince, and thank you again for the presentation. It's great to have the opportunity to comment before you actually go through the DRP formal process. And I think many of the design ideas that you're already exploring through the compilation of precedents, examples, as well as your sketches are starting to take shape, and many of the comments that you have focused on this specific presentation, as well as your updated drawings, indicate that you're still looking for further comments and ideas on how to shape this building. So from my perspective, I would say that following the design guideline requirement for your tower footprint will be an important element in helping minimize the length of this building and its massing and its presence next to the park. I think somehow by having a cantilevered recessed podium, it doesn't feel as proud and as present as it should be in such an important interface with such an important public open space. Whether it's a double height or whether it's 2 levels of retail or a combination of what you're showing right now, retail with parking above. The massing maybe of the podium component has to touch ground somehow, and that still needs some work. You did mention that the need of better awnings and canopies that really better articulate that transition to the park need to be explored. And I wonder if it's reverting that massing exercise and actually having the podium component touch ground, and then articulate your facades in a way that still have that more granular approach into how you transition or how you address the street. Retail being in an uncertain time, retail can be an LCBO or more of a mom and pop local business setup. I think as you explore design opportunities for your grade-related component, you will benefit from integrating a modulation that can be as flexible as possible and allow a range of retail opportunities to happen and to be addressed and be expressed in your facade articulation. I think the kind of flat iron, kind of a narrower side of your building can present really interesting opportunities to do a different sort of building articulation, and use the tower set in the back as kind of a counterpart of how you read the building when you look at it from that side. And the other big component that you mentioned that you're hinting at is how you break the length of the building and its presence on Rebecca Street. And that's when not only your massing and close attention to the articulation will come in, but also the materiality. Commenting back on the white cube building that you originally submitted, there were really exciting components to it. Maybe the tower was really, really wide and long, and that was one detriment to it. But I think where you transition to the more vertical facade articulation, there was the modulation was lost in translation, and it didn't kind of flow from one idea and treatment into the more vertical treatment. And so I think as you go forward in your massing and facade expression exercise, that close relationship of how you maintain that golden ratio, that articulation and that modulation throughout the entirety of the length, but still manage to be read as 2 buildings or one different building with different, one single building but different materialities will be key. So yeah, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Yute. Who we got next here? We got Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. David, could you just pull up one of the renderings again of the building?
Yeah.
So I'm going to touch on a couple of things that have been discussed that actually you've talked about already. One is regarding the ground floor, and I think you've acknowledged there's not enough height there. So absolutely that does need to be raised and just made much more prominent and visible from the public realm. The other comment was regarding the amenity space, and this goes really to what the larger area could become over time, and how Rebecca may or may not become an important sort of commercial street, setting aside all the challenges now and during the pandemic. But over time, I think you could see that as this whole East End neighborhood evolves and grows, that there will be a lot of density, there will be a lot of people here, and that people want to be at the park, and that will certainly stimulate demand for restaurants, if not other retail, and probably a lot of neighborhood scale uses, convenience stores, dry cleaners, all that stuff. So I think it's an important retail edge. That being said, yeah, I think you could put some amenity space on the ground floor on that street. I wouldn't put it on the corners, though. I think I'd rather see it mid-block, maybe near the kind of main entrance to the building, the lobby to the building. I think the corners really should be reserved for future commercial space. So that's my comment on that. My major comment is the massing. This is going to be a very imposing building, and I actually cannot think of any existing building in downtown Hamilton that will be nearly at this scale, this imposing overall. I mean, quite simply, the podium height at 12 stories is just way too high. This is really what this is a slab building with a tower on top of it, and you put those things together, it rarely works. The impacts on the pedestrian realm would be, I think, would be mostly negative. It's not so much shadows on the park in this case, but there will be significant shadow impacts on the north-south streets that border the site, on Catherine and the others. So it's just a lot of mass. And to me, and really what would have been nice to see, and you at the beginning of your package, you actually laid out what the submission requirements are for the DRP, and in there is a contextual analysis, like looking at the area and showing how your building fits into both the existing and the planned or anticipated context for this area. There isn't a lot of built context here. There are a lot of parking lots. That certainly has to be acknowledged. But we look a little bit more broadly at downtown Hamilton. It is a kind of low to mid-rise sort of base building condition in many cases. And you look at, we have that lovely 6-story kind of deco building. Kitty Corner to you is a good example of that. It's sort of at that scale. Now we're changing all that in the future by bringing a lot of more tall buildings downtown. But the base of those buildings, the podiums, I think need to respect the scale of historic Hamilton. Going to 12 stories, if you could imagine all the other parking lots having 12-story podiums, to me that's going to create a very mean condition on those adjacent streets, and just not be. It's too transformational, I think, from my perspective. And I think really and this is in the tall building guidelines. This is a sort of the major comment, I think, maybe from all of us, is that there needs to be more respect for those guidelines, and that means bringing that podium height down quite considerably to me no more than 6, maybe 7 stories. The tower also should be respecting those guidelines. Should respect the floor plate maximum of 750 square meters. And particularly because you are orienting it east-west, so the wide part of the tower is, again, overlooking the park and contributing to the kind of overwhelming feeling of this building. So, if you had a deeper site, that certainly would be ideal, and you could turn that tower, and maybe going a little more than 750, given the opportunities on this larger block, might have been okay. But I think you've really got to just narrow the building, narrow the tower just a little, bring the podium down. Obviously, it means a not insignificant reduction in density. I appreciate that's going to be a challenge for the owner of the site, but this is just too much mass for this site, for this downtown, for this context, in my view. Now, building on Uta's comment, this is a big site. It's a 100-meter wide block, and a 100-meter wide building is a very long building. You are breaking up the massing. There is some attempt here to break up the facade, but as Uta was suggesting, this is actually, for me, the podium of this building, again, at 6 or 7 stories, should be broken up into at least 2, if not 3 or 4 distinct parts, so that it actually reads like 3 or 4 different buildings in terms of their facade. Obviously, behind it, it's all one building, but I think that would be much more respectful of the downtown Hamilton fabric. It's finer grain, exactly to Uta's point there. So I like the way your parking piece here, at least in the concept here, how you've articulated that is appealing. But it creates a distinct part of the building, a base, and on top of that is another part of the podium, and then you get to the tower. I think if you could take that whole podium and keeping some of the ideas you have in those lower floors, make them much more, create these vertical pieces across the facade that can all be, I think, quite relate to each other, but be different in terms of fenestration and materiality. It would make it just a much more interesting and, again, respectful building overall. That was my main comment. I think we will look forward to, seeing your final design, and particularly, I think, how you're dealing with the parking. You're suggesting here, I think, a lot of windows. I just don't know how that's quite going to work. So the details of that are going to be very, very important. Those floors really need to kind of look and feel like not a parking structure. I think you've already acknowledged that, but like an actual building with people in it, even though there won't be people in it. I think I will end my comments there. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Maybe Jackie could join in.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Just a comment on Tim's, and not that I want to jump in, but when Tim makes a recommendation about reducing the size of the podium or the tower, when there's an approval of rezoning, how do we handle that, Mr. Chair, through Tim? Because that means, it's contrary to what has been approved. So,
well, my comment on that is that I'll just jump in because I'm a planner, and I, that's why I asked the question about the zoning. Yeah. I mean, it is a little unfortunate, I think, that the 2018 rezoning of the site maybe didn't be very specific about maximum building envelopes, maximum podium heights. It probably should have. But what I gather is that basically there's a height limit on this site, and that's about it. But that doesn't mean that you can fill up the whole site with up to that height. That now, through the site plan process, there has to be acknowledgement of the many urban design guidelines in the secondary plan, which I think are kind of consistent with some of my comments, and certainly the tall building guidelines. So, notwithstanding the zoning, I don't think it allows you to kind of fill up the site to 30 stories. So I don't see this as necessarily an as of right question. That's my view of city staff.
The reason I say that, Tim, we weren't involved in the rezoning of this project. It was only until the developer bought it. I think the next time we should show the drawings and do a comparison between what the submitted rezoning said and where we'll be. And I think you'll see the difficulty we've had in moving forward from the approval process of the rezoning.
I'm just going to interrupt here. I think we need to stick to the comments. We're already 12 minutes over time, and we still have a lot of the panel members to get through. So if you have questions, maybe we can leave them to the end.
Jackie, are you able to provide comments?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I apologize. We have a power outage, and so I'm dialing in by phone, and I missed the presentation, so I'll make a comment, assuming it wasn't said, but maybe it was said. Great idea with the one earth next to the park, and my only comment is with so many people coming between the building and the park to just make sure that engineering allows those traffic calming measures of raised crosswalks to be across there to make sure that we maintain pedestrian priority over the car. And that's about it.
Thank you, Jackie. We're into Yasin.
Yeah. Hi, Vince. Thanks. I'll try to be quick. Yeah, I suspect, David, I suspect the difficulty of sorry, I'll just, first of all, I fully support, number one, I fully support a higher retail frontage. And I think it would be great if that somehow that 4-story parking skirt could be raised to look like it's 3 stories. And so that the proportion is different at that lower level. because when I go back to your urban design principles that you spoke out about, I feel like that parking podium is what deserves the urban design attention. And actually, there's no habitation there, so it needs some habitation and some kind of some activity there from retail. So whether it's 2 stories of retail with some mezzanine spaces, or in fact, if there is some thin layer, thin bar of retail that you can extract out of the parking at that edge, so that there is a higher frontage for the retail. The second comment I would say is that if I find that your podium should be at level 5. It's this interstitial space that you are identifying as part of the podium, the 7-story piece, that I feel is problematic in the massing, and is creating a lack of clarity between the podium and tower sort of precedents that you're showing. And so I think I'm probably along the same thinking that Tim is proposing, where, if I imagine the podium being at 5 stories, with the parking there buried, sandwiched in 3 stories somehow, and maybe there's a 3.5 story with 2 stories of visually 2 stories of retail, but that other 7-story sandwich of space, I think, needs to get redistributed on the podium. And so I'm almost like, I guess I would say that your floor plate might be too big I think it is too big on the tower, and that tower needs to, the disposition of the tower needs to change into potentially three elements. And I almost imagine it as something that steps up to the height of 30 stories, so that it all appears as there are 3 elements sitting on a 5-story podium, as opposed to this kind of monolith of 11 stories that you have as the podium, which is 12 stories, which is the podium, which is, I think, problematic. That 7-story wall is creating a massing problem, I think, because the tower can't be read clearly, neither than the podium. It's creating some confusion. And I think the confusion then is translating into the way you're distributing the materials on the architecture, because you have such a long block that you're having to break it up, but yet it's the surface, they're all surface treatments as opposed to distinct volumetric pieces of architecture, right? Meaning that they're clearly understood as distinct elements. Right now, it feels like everything is being, the materials are being wallpapered onto a massing envelope, where everything is sitting outside of a perimeter line. So there's not enough differentiation or depth that's coming across, which your previous option did, like the one you sent to us, that was starting to get to some kind of definition of the architecture. But I feel that it's the 7-story piece that's causing difficulty for you. I'm going to leave it at that. So I hope that was clear. If it's not, then I'll, if we have time, I can explain it.
Okay, we're going to move on. Colin.
Yeah, great presentation. I'm just going to focus on the streetscape and Loon Earth. I think there's a great opportunity to have trees that get really big here, so they should be provided adequate soil volume. So it looks to me like there's an opportunity to do a continuous soil trench. That should be a condition for the city of site plan approval, is soil volume for those trees. There's also an opportunity for those trees to take stormwater from the Loon Earth to pre-treat, detain, infiltrate as much as possible before it gets picked up by the municipal system. And of the options that you presented, I think one option that leans more towards picking up on the design typologies established in the park, so the kind of circles would be a better fit in transition, as opposed to some of the band circular elements. I think that would be a nice tie-in. And that's all I have. Thank you.
James?
Again, great presentation. Thank you very much, David. Really do appreciate your explanation of the proposal and also your comments with regards to where you are at in the design process, and seem to be welcoming for some further changes and evolution of the design. I agree with the comments that you've heard. I won't repeat them. I think I'll just try and emphasize or reinforce again. It's that facade, that length of that facade. When I looked at your precedents, I actually initially, without looking at the descriptions, thought that maybe that was going to be your approach to that design, where you've got essentially 100 meters, you've got space for 3 to 4 different buildings, and maybe that's how that facade can be treated. Essentially what both Tim and Uta were suggesting to you. The project has almost competing objectives in terms of its horizontal issues and its vertical issues. But the base is such an important component of this because it really is going to be the focal point for the pedestrian experience and helps mitigate the added height above. So I encourage you to really look closely at the design modifications that you're going to make at that podium base level that should in fact be in that range of, I think the numbers I'm hearing is in the range of 5 to 7 stories to a maximum. Complying with zoning does not necessarily make good urban design. So if you're finding elements of those current zoning regulations that are confining you, City of Hamilton is excellent at processing minor variances, and if minor variances are predicated on the basis of achieving a better design fit for the overall project benefit, I think that you should certainly explore those with your project team. And lastly, I'm not a big fan of seeing parking at upper stories where it's potentially exposed. So I do look forward to seeing how you come up with a range of materials and design treatments to effectively buffer, hide that parking, but still add some architectural interest to those portions of the building. That's all, Vince. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Okay, Colin, you can take the chair. I think it's a density issue. And now you're looking for a way to resolve it all. And I think the density, I don't know too many people who bring 500 units on the market at once, but that's neither here nor there. But obviously the base has, we talk about buildings no longer than 40 meters in length before there's a major break in the facade. I mean, a major break in the facade, not a subtle surface treatment. So I think that's one of the urban design guidelines that should be respected, and the notion of activating the building with the street is simply not happening here. So our role here isn't about how this meets zoning or how it complies to certain specifics under the zoning, but it's here to talk about the public realm and how the building relates both in scale, massing, and in materiality and form. And the form in this case is a very long box raised off the ground to accommodate parking for almost 500 units. And then from that point on, you've very carefully articulated what I might call a middle podium and tower. And even though you've achieved what I think is, an interesting approach, it's 100 meters long. And a lot of blocks, once they get over 70 meters, really fall into this kind of a problem, unless a developer is willing to break it. And the only way this impact of this wall is going to be broken is to break it. So, the impact of the wall is going to be different from what's here now, is to break it. So I think that's a recommendation you need to look at. And then from my perspective, it's really dropping the density and looking at opportunities and other ways in which you can generate revenue. Like I honestly think that facade is when I use the term vertical real estate, I'm talking about retail that could be accommodated on the upper floors and restaurants, and the signage revenue alone on that facade, that opportunity for signage will generate a lot more revenue than an extra 60 or 80 or 100 apartments. So I think that's something that you might want to consider going forward. Other than that, I want to thank you for your presentation. It's been a very strong presentation, and your explanations have been very well articulated and clear to the committee. I guess we'll close by asking you if you need any other, if you'd like us to reiterate any of these comments that we've made to you, or whether you're quite happy with what you've heard and it's been clear enough to you to move forward from here.
No, thank you, Vincent. Part of this is, you know, panels are a very good process, and if you bring them forward at the right time and you get the right feedback, then when you bring them back again and you show the variations and the comments have been incorporated, I think it's a valuable lesson in being able to do good urban planning and design. So I've heard all the comments. I think we know how to restructure some of those. The others we'll have to take back to the client. And we look forward to coming back with a refreshed design in the towards the new year.
Yeah, David, we do appreciate you coming in early for sure. It doesn't happen that often enough.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone.